Soe Estate had been built to make people remember their place. The carved wooden gates rose taller than most houses. Silk lanterns swayed beneath stone columns. Beyond the entrance, a modern Hannock mansion stretched across the hillside with glass walls, black roof lines, marble floors, bonsai gardens, reflecting pools, and pine trees sculpted like old prayers. On that golden afternoon, the estate looked ready for tradition. Relatives gathered in formal silk and tailored suits. Bodyguards stood near imported cars in the circular driveway. Elderly aunts whispered behind fans. Young cousins pretended not to stare at the photographers waiting near the entrance. Jean Taorian stepped out of a black sedan first. He wore an immaculate black Italian suit, his face controlled, his posture calm, his presence heavy enough to quiet conversations without effort. As head of Sarian Crest, he protected heritage properties, moved luxury assets through private channels, and settled family disputes before they became public scandals. Today was supposed to be simple. A formal introduction. A blessing. A new beginning. He turned and offered his hand to CO Harry. His new bride emerged in an ivory couture dress, diamond earrings bright beneath the afternoon sun. She was elegant, polished, and perfectly prepared for a room that valued appearance before truth. Her smile held the discipline of a woman raised to represent a family. Taorian guided her toward the entrance, where his mother waited. Madame Jean Woolry stood beneath the carved doorway in an emerald silk hanbok embroidered with subtle gold cranes. Age had not softened her authority. She looked like tradition given a human face, proud, still, impossible to ignore. Taorian extended one hand toward Harry. "Mother," he said, "this is Harry." Harry bowed with perfect grace. Madame Jean did not move. At first, everyone thought she was measuring the bride. Then her eyes shifted past the ivory dress, past the diamonds, past the photographers, past the careful arrangement of a future marriage, toward the stone pathway beyond the entrance. Taorian followed her gaze and froze. Mornike Adeyemi stood near the bonsai garden in a cream designer dress beneath a camel overcoat, her curls falling over one shoulder, her face composed in a way that made composure look painful. She had not dressed to compete. She had dressed to be taken seriously. Mornike, he said before he could stop himself. Harry looked at him. The relatives turned. Whispers moved like wind through silk. The black ex-wife. The woman the family once refused. The divorce no one discussed except in softened lies. Mornike did not step forward. She stood where the estate steward, Mrs. Gilwason, had placed her, holding a leather document case in both hands. Before Taorian could ask why she was there, Madame Jean began walking. Not toward Harry. Toward Mornike. The entire entrance went silent. Harry's smile held for one more second, then began to fade. Madame Jean crossed the marble threshold with tears filling her eyes. This was the same woman who once corrected Mornike's name in public. The same woman who once refused to let her sit near the family elders. The same woman who believed a black foreign woman could not understand the Jean bloodline, the estate, or the burden of old Korean heritage. Now she reached Mornike with trembling hands. Mornike's calm cracked. "Madame Jean." But the elderly matriarch opened her arms and embraced her. Gasps scattered across the courtyard. Taorian stared as if the estate itself had shifted beneath him. Harry stood beside him, frozen, her face caught between humiliation and confusion. Mornike returned the embrace slowly, as if afraid the moment might punish her for believing it. Madame Jean held her tighter and whispered, loud enough for the nearest relatives to hear. "I was wrong about you. And this house survived because you were better than we deserved." The words moved through the entrance like thunder without sound. Jean Paekjun, Taorian's uncle, stiffened near the steps. Seo Munjae, Harry's father, stopped smiling. "Mrs. Gil lowered her eyes, but her hands shook with relief. Taorian finally found his voice. "Mother, what is this?" Madame Jean released Mornike, but kept one hand clasped around hers. Her eyes turned toward the family. "The woman I rejected protected this house while my own blood sold pieces of it." The photographers lowered their cameras. No one had told them how to capture a blessing turning into an accusation. Years earlier, Mornike Adeyemi had entered Sowe estate as a bride who still believed love could teach a house new manners. She was wrong, not because love was weak, because prejudice had been living there longer. When Taorian first brought her home, he held her hand too tightly, as if grip could become protection. He was proud of her intelligence, her calm, her laughter, her ability to discuss estate finance with old men who expected beauty to come without numbers. Madame Jean had welcomed her with a smile sharp enough to pass for courtesy. "You speak Korean well," she said during the first dinner. "Thank you," Mornike replied. "For a foreigner," Madame Jean added. The table went quiet. Taorian's jaw tightened, but Mornike squeezed his hand beneath the table and answered softly, "I am still learning." That became the pattern. Not shouting, not open cruelty at first. Polished rejection. Mornike was seated farther from the elders because new family members should observe. Her food gifts were accepted by staff, then never served. Her full name was shortened without permission because relatives found it inconvenient. Her future children were discussed, as if their existence required family debate. At ceremonies, she was corrected. At dinners, she was tested. At memorial rites, she was watched as though one misstep would prove what they had already decided. Taorian defended her in public moments, but he did not understand the private erosion. He fought large insults because large insults were easy to name. He missed the smaller ones because they arrived wrapped in tradition. Then Mornike found the irregularities. She had been trained in heritage finance and estate preservation law, and Sowe's trust records bothered her almost immediately. Pages had been copied out of order. Asset maps lacked witness stamps. A transfer draft referenced cultural properties that could not legally move without elder approval. When she mentioned it to Taorian, he was in the middle of a violent business crisis involving a stolen logistics route and 3 missing guards. "Not now," he said, exhausted. "I need you to hear me." "I do hear you." "No," she said. "You hear trouble. You do not hear warning." He regretted the argument before it ended, but regret did not repair the moment. Jean Paekjun moved quickly. He told Madame Jean that Mornike had become obsessed with money. He hinted that she was studying documents to strengthen her divorce position. He suggested her discomfort in the family had turned into resentment. Madame Jean believed him because belief protected her from shame. The final insult came during an ancestral preparation dinner. Mornike found one of the old trust ledgers moved from the archive and confronted Paekjun quietly. By morning, the family had heard that she had been searching private rooms without permission. Taorian asked her why she had not waited for him. Mornike looked at him as if something inside her had gone still. "I have been waiting," she said. "You only notice when waiting becomes leaving." The divorce papers came 3 weeks later. Taorian believed she had chosen escape over marriage. Madame Jean believed the foreign daughter-in-law had proven temporary. Paekjun believed the danger had passed. Only Mornike knew the truth. As she signed her name, she whispered, "One day, he will know I did not leave the marriage. I left the trap." Then she disappeared from the family's version of the story, but not from the estate's. Mornike did not leave Sowe estate empty-handed. She left with copies. Not jewelry. Not revenge photographs. Documents. Trust pages scanned beneath the weak light of a rented apartment. Tax notices photographed before they could vanish. Payroll records sent to an encrypted archive. Land maps traced from originals with shaking fingers because she knew Paekjun would destroy what he could not alter. After the divorce, people assumed she had gone bitter. They were wrong. Bitterness would have been easier. Instead, she investigated. The deeper she looked, the worse it became. Jean Paekjun had used estate-linked assets as collateral for private ventures disguised as heritage development. Maintenance accounts had been frozen while relatives continued hosting ceremonies. Staff wages had been delayed, then quietly covered with personal loans from Mrs. Gill. Tax penalties threatened ancestral land that had belonged to the family for generations. Madame Jean knew none of it. Taorian knew only fragments. Paekjun controlled the flow of information, like a man placing curtains over fire. Mornike could have watched the estate collapse. Part of her wanted to. There is a private satisfaction in seeing a house that rejected you learn what you had been protecting. But then Mrs. Gill called her one winter morning. Her voice was smaller than Mornike remembered. The kitchen staff have not been paid in 3 weeks. Mornike closed her eyes. Does Madame Jean know?
No. Huh.
He is overseas. Paekjun says funds are delayed. And you believe him? Mrs. Gill did not answer. That was answer enough. Mornike used part of her divorce settlement and a heritage preservation fund she had built quietly with 2 former colleagues. The money did not arrive under her name. The family would have rejected it. Or worse, Paekjun would have blocked it. It arrived as an emergency preservation loan through a discreet trust. Staff were paid. The roof repairs continued. Tax penalties were delayed. The old documents she had copied remained safe. She told herself she was not doing it for the Jean family. She was doing it for the staff, for the ancestral land, for history that should not be stolen by men hiding behind tradition. Still, there were nights when she hated how much she cared. Years passed. Then Mrs. Gill finally brought the truth to Madame Jean. It happened after the old matriarch found a sealed envelope in her late husband's archive, one Paekjun had missed. Inside was a note from Mornike, never delivered, explaining the altered trust pages and warning that the estate transfer drafts were dangerous. Madame Jean read it once. Then again. Her hands trembled. Mrs. Gill stood nearby, tears in her eyes. There is more, the steward said. She explained the frozen wages, the disguised emergency loan, the preserved documents, the scanned trust pages. The way Mornike had kept helping after the family drove her out. Madame Jean sat down slowly. For the first time in years, pride had nowhere to stand. The woman you would not let sit beside you, Mrs. Gill said quietly, kept your husband's house standing. Madame Jean covered her mouth. Not elegantly, not like a matriarch, like a woman finally hearing the cost of her own prejudice. 3 days later, she asked Mrs. Gill to invite Mornike back to Sowie Estate. Not as family, not yet, as an auditor, because repentance without truth would only become another performance. CO Harry had prepared for many things before arriving at Sowie Estate. Cold relatives, a difficult mother-in-law, comparisons to the ex-wife, photographers, whispered judgments about her dress, her family, her posture, her ability to become the next woman beside Jean Taorian. She had not prepared to be ignored at her own introduction. She stood beside Taorian while Madame Jean held Mornike's hand, and embarrassment crawled up her neck beneath the diamonds. Her father, Co Munjae, stepped close enough to murmur, without moving his lips. Remain graceful. Harry's smile returned by training, not feeling. But her eyes had begun to observe. Her father did not look confused. He looked angry. That frightened her more. If Mornike's arrival were a social surprise, Co Munjae would have performed concern. Instead, his jaw tightened at the words independent heritage finance auditor. He glanced once at Jean Paekjun, and Paekjun's face carried the same hidden irritation. Harry had grown up beside powerful men. She knew the difference between shock and exposure. Madame Jean led everyone inside the grand entrance hall. Tea was not served. Photographs were cancelled. The blessing table remained untouched beneath silk lanterns. Taorian pulled Mornike aside, near the inner garden corridor. Why are you here? Her eyes held his without softness. Because your estate documents are being altered again. Again? You never wanted to know the first time? Pain flashed across his face. I wanted to know. No, she said. You wanted me to survive quietly until your family became kind. He had no answer. Harry heard enough from several steps away. Not everything. Enough. Her father noticed and touched her elbow. This does not concern you. She looked at him. My name is on today's ceremony documents. That is ceremonial. Then why are you worried? His expression changed. Briefly. Then he smiled like a chairman. My daughter, do not confuse another woman's bitterness with truth. Harry looked across the hall at Mornike. The ex-wife was not performing bitterness. She looked tired, controlled, prepared. A woman did not carry a leather document case to ruin a ceremony out of jealousy. She carried it because paper mattered. Words floated through the entrance hall as attorney staff gathered near Mrs. Gill. Heritage transfer. Foundation custody. Trust asset review. Missing pages. Marriage-linked access. Cultural preservation grant. Harry's pulse slowed. Her family foundation had recently expanded into heritage property custody. Her father had praised the marriage as a union of tradition, security, and culture. She had believed it. Now she wondered whether her ivory dress was not a symbol of love or alliance. Maybe it was a ribbon around a transaction. She removed her ceremonial gloves finger by finger, then walked toward Mornike. Taorian and his ex-wife both turned. Harry's voice was quiet but steady. What exactly did my family come here to sign? For the first time that afternoon, Mornike looked at her not as the new bride, not as replacement, but as another woman standing too close to a trap. That, Mornike said, is the right question, Mrs. Gill led them beneath the estate through a corridor hidden behind carved wooden panels in the ancestral hall. The air changed downstairs. Above them, Sowe estate glowed with sunlight, silk, glass, and polished stone. Below, the old rooms smelled of cedar, paper, dust, and secrets that had waited too long to be handled. Madame Jean walked slowly, one hand against the wall. Taorian followed beside Harry, his face dark with controlled anger. Mornike carried the leather document case. Attorney Moon's estate counterpart, Council Park Ito, unlocked the archive chamber. Inside were the family's original trust ledgers, land maps, founder letters, old seals, tax records, asset transfer drafts, and ceremonial agreements prepared for the day's blessing. Mornike placed 3 sets of documents on the long table. Original trust structure, she said. Then the second stack. Altered internal copy. Then the third. Marriage-linked transfer draft prepared under CO Cultural Preservation Foundation custody. Harry looked at the heading and went cold. Her father's foundation seal sat beneath the draft. Mornike continued. The transfer is framed as temporary preservation custody. But once the assets move into foundation management, they can be leveraged, refinanced, politically controlled, or separated from Jean family trust restrictions. Taorian picked up the paper. These are ancestral properties. Yes. They cannot be transferred without elder witness approval. Mornike pointed to the page. They manufactured elder approval through altered witness stamps. Madame Jean sat down. Her face had lost its old severity. Now she looked like a woman watching strangers rearrange her husband's grave. Harry's voice trembled despite her effort. My signature is here. Prepared, Mornike said. Not signed. Harry stared at it. Seo Munjae and Jean Paekjun had planned to use the introduction ceremony as social proof. Once she and Taorian stood before both families, once the blessing photograph circulated, once the union appeared sealed by tradition, the transfer would look natural. Family harmony, cultural preservation, heritage partnership, stolen property dressed in silk. Taorian turned to Mornike. How long have you known? Long enough to know Paekjun did not act alone. Not long enough to stop today without bringing everyone to the same table. Harry's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Not yet. She reached for the ceremonial draft and saw her father's notes in the margin. Her father had written, Bride approval provides public continuity.
Bride.
Not daughter. Not Harry.
Bride.
A function. A seal. A soft object placed over hard theft. Madame Jean looked across the table at Mornike. You understood these documents before my own family did. Mornike's expression did not soften.
No, Madame Jean.
Your family understood them. They simply hoped no one worthy of being ignored would read them. The sentence hit the room cleanly. She placed the original trust page in the center of the table. This house was never endangered by outsiders, she said. It was endangered by people who thought inheritance meant permission. No one spoke. Above them, silk lanterns waited for a blessing that would no longer happen. Below, in the ancestral hall, the future of Sowe estate stopped belonging to ceremony and returned to evidence. Jean Paekjun entered the ancestral archive as if anger itself had been invited to speak. Behind him came Seo Munjae, Harry's father, his face arranged into public calm though his eyes moved too quickly across the documents on the table. Paekjun pointed at Mornike. This is disgraceful. An ex-wife brought beneath the ancestral hall to humiliate the family during a bride introduction? Mornike did not move. That is one way to describe evidence. Evidence. Paekjun laughed without warmth. You left this family. You have no standing here. Madame Jean Woolry rose slowly from her chair. The room changed when she stood. For decades, people had mistaken her silence for agreement because silence had usually served power. Not today. I call her outsider when she was the only one honoring our house, Madame Jean said. Paekjun turned to her, stunned. Sister-in-law.
No.
You will not hide behind family words now. Seo Munjae stepped forward, smoother than Paekjun. Madame Jean, emotions are high. Miss Adeyemi may have misunderstood certain preservation mechanisms. My foundation only intended to protect cultural assets from mismanagement. Harry stared at her father. Then why was my signature prepared before I was told what it meant? Munji's jaw tightened. It was ceremonial. Mornike opened another folder. Ceremonial documents do not include asset custody triggers, refinance permissions, and trustee displacement clauses. Paekjun slammed his palm on the table. Enough. Mornike looked at him then, calm as a blade.
No.
We are only beginning. She placed the forged seal impressions beside the originals. The date format on this approval does not match the elder's writing period. This witness stamp appears on 3 documents after the witness had already died. The routing numbers connect to a holding account associated with Seo Cultural Preservation Foundation. And this page. She lifted a trust sheet carefully. Uses a scanned seal copied from an unrelated land tax filing. Harry's face went pale. She turned to her father. Did you know? Seo Munjae did not answer quickly enough. Sometimes silence was not emptiness. Sometimes it was confession waiting for courage it did not have. Harry stepped back from him. Paekjun pointed toward Mornike again. She is doing this for revenge. Mornike's voice softened, which made it more devastating. If I wanted revenge, I would have let this house fall the first time you endangered it. The archive went silent. Taorian looked at his uncle like he was seeing a stranger wearing an old family name. Above them, guests waited for a blessing. Below, the people who planned to steal the estate had run out of elegant words. The family tried to return upstairs as if ceremony could cover what evidence had opened. Silk lanterns still hung above the garden courtyard. The blessing table still waited with white flowers, jade cups, formal papers, and 2 families arranged into a photograph that would have looked beautiful if no one knew what it meant. Seo Munjae reached for Harry's arm. Smile, he whispered. Do not embarrass your family because of another woman's bitterness. Harry looked at his hand on her sleeve. For the first time in her life, his touch felt less like guidance and more like placement. A silk ribbon around stolen paper. She pulled her arm away. The relatives quieted when she stepped toward the blessing table alone. Taorian watched her, still and wary. Mornike stood near Madame Jean, her document case closed, saying nothing. Harry looked out at the gathered faces. Aunts waiting for tradition. Businessmen waiting for access. Photographers waiting for permission. Her father waiting for obedience. Then she picked up the ceremonial document and held it high enough for everyone to see. This ceremony will not continue. Gasps moved through the courtyard. Seo Munji's smile cracked. Harry. She did not turn. I was told this blessing represented family unity. I now understand my name was prepared as public continuity for documents I did not approve. Her hand trembled, but her voice did not. I will not be used as silk ribbon around stolen paper. The sentence landed harder than shouting. Jean Paekjun moved toward her. Young lady, this is not your place. It is my name, Harry said. So yes, it is my place. She walked to her father and placed the unsigned document back into his hands. Find another seal. Mornike looked at her then. Not with victory, with recognition. The new bride had just lost the safety of obedience in front of everyone. Taorian bowed his head slightly toward Harry. Respect, not romance. Madame Jean turned to the gathered family and said, The blessing is cancelled. The investigation begins. The photographers finally understood there would be no wedding image today. Only evidence. and a bride who refused to become decoration for theft. After the courtyard emptied, Taorian found more Nike in the bonsai garden. The late afternoon light had softened. Water moved quietly through the reflecting pool. Behind them, Soe Estate looked unchanged, which seemed almost insulting after everything it had revealed. More Nike stood beneath a sculpted pine, arms folded, face turned toward the stone path. Taorian stopped several steps away. In the past, he would have moved closer. In the past, he would have believed closeness was apology. Now he knew better. "I failed you," he said. More Nike did not answer. He forced himself to continue. "I thought loving you against the world was enough. I did not understand the world was sitting at my mother's table." Her eyes closed briefly. "That is the first honest thing you have said about our marriage." The words hurt, but he accepted them. "I should have listened when you warned me." "Yes." "I should have noticed what they did to you in small rooms." "Yes." "I should have protected you inside my home, not only defended you when outsiders were watching." More Nike looked at him then. There were old feelings in her eyes, but they had learned boundaries. "Do not turn regret into a second proposal." He swallowed. "I won't." Madame Jean approached slowly from the veranda, without attendants for once. The emerald hanbok moved softly around her, but her face no longer carried the same untouchable pride. She stopped before More Nike. "I owe you more than a private apology." More Nike studied her. "You owe the truth to more than me." "Yes." Madame Jin's voice shook. "Will you allow me to apologize before the elders?" More Nike looked toward the estate, then back at the woman who had once made every dinner feel like an examination. "Do it for the next woman you are tempted to call unworthy before you know what she carries." Madame Jean bowed.
Not slightly, deeply.
Taorian had never seen his mother bow that way to anyone outside ritual. More Nike accepted it with silence. Sometimes silence was not forgiveness. Sometimes it was the first respectful space where forgiveness might someday stand. That evening, the dining hall was rearranged. The original seating chart had placed Seo Harry beside Madame Jean, with Taorian across from her, and the two families aligned like a polished agreement. Mrs. Gill removed the name cards herself. No one stopped her. When the family gathered beneath the chandeliers, Madame Jean stood at the head of the table. Her voice was steady, but her hands held the chair beside her. "Tonight, the first seat belongs to the woman I once left standing." Every face turned toward More Nike. She did not move at first, perhaps because some wounds take a moment to understand they are no longer being repeated. Then Harry stepped aside. "Tonight should repair what was broken before it blesses anything new," she said. More Nike looked at her. The two women held each other's gaze. Not rivals. Not replacements. Two women who had nearly been used by the same house in different ways. More Nike walked to the chair beside Madame Jean and sat. The room absorbed the reversal. Madame Jean remained standing. "I was cruel," she said. "I called prejudice tradition because tradition sounded cleaner. I corrected her name because I did not want to learn it properly. I questioned her place because I feared what it would mean if she belonged without my permission." No one breathed loudly. "She preserved my husband's documents. She helped cover staff wages when this house was being quietly drained. She protected the estate after I helped drive her from it." Mrs. Gill stepped forward with records confirming the emergency payments, the preserved scans, the notices Paekjun had hidden. Paekjun was not present. Neither was Seo Munjae. Both had been removed from estate authority by evening and placed under legal review. Harry sat across from More Nike, her ivory dress now without ceremonial purpose. "I am sorry," she said quietly. More Nike shook her head. "You did not steal from me."
"No," Arai replied.
"But I nearly benefited from what was stolen." That honesty mattered. Taorian looked at both women and understood that the future he imagined had been built too quickly over an unburied past. Madame Jean sat beside More Nike. For the first time, the family table did not ask the black woman to prove why she belonged. It listened while the house admitted why it had failed her. Months later, Soe Estate no longer functioned on whispered authority. The Ancestral Trust had an independent board. Marriage-linked asset transfers were banned. Staff wages were protected through locked accounts. Every trust document was digitized, verified, witnessed, and legally secured. Jean Paekjun's authority disappeared into court filings. Seo Munji's foundation lost access before it could touch a single stone. Harry and Taeorian paused their engagement. There was no dramatic hatred between them, only the sober understanding that a marriage begun as strategy needed time before it could become choice. Harry returned to her own work and later sent Mornike a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing me the trap before I decorated it." Mornike kept the note. She did not answer immediately. Some respect deserved time to mature. At the annual memorial ceremony, Madame Jean invited Mornike openly. No hidden title, no careful distance, no shortened name. When Mornike entered the estate this time, relatives bowed without confusion. Mrs. Gill smiled from the doorway. The staff greeted her like someone whose absence had once been a wound in the house. After the memorial, Mornike stood near the same grand entrance where Madame Jean had embraced her months before. Taeorian joined her beneath the carved wooden doors. "Thank you," he said. "You have said that before. I mean it differently now." She looked toward the reflecting pool. "That is a start." He hesitated. "Is there any future where you might stay?" Mornike smiled faintly, not unkindly. "There may be, but not because this family finally saw my worth. Only if I decide this house has learned how to keep it." Before he could answer, Madame Jean came forward and placed one hand gently over Mornike's. "Then we will keep learning." Mornike looked at the older woman. Once, that hand had refused to welcome her. Now it did not pull. It did not claim. It simply rested there, asking nothing except the chance to do better. The Korean Mafia boss had brought his new bride home expecting tradition to bless his future. But when his once racist mother walked past the bride and hugged his black ex-wife first, the family learned that belonging was never about blood, ceremony, or approval. It was about who protected the house when the house refused to protect her.